Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back and wide receiver rankings for Week 12. I'm going to give you the top 40-plus running backs, top 50-plus wide receivers, the top 100 overall between these two positions, but not in a flex combination like I did last week. They will be ranked individually in a tier-based system. That is the structure of this video. Running backs, then receivers, and then a last-minute checkup on quarterback, tight end, and defense heading in to Week 12. So no time to waste. Let us begin at running back. In Week 12, I think the top three, we got Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, sometimes Bijan Robinson is in this tier. Usually he's above Gibbs, but this week I don't think so. I really feel confident in Jahmyr Gibbs. Against the Giants, they are not going to have any answer for him whatsoever. I know their offensive line is a little banged up right now, but everyone's questionable. I expect the main focal points of that O-line to play, and the Giants are just so dog shit on defense. 4 weeks ago, they gave up 256 rushing yards. In the last 4 weeks, on average, 153 rushing yards per game allowed. So there is no stopping Jahmyr Gibbs. He is going to dominate. The Giants are giving up 6.2 yards per carry in the last 4 games. So he's going to crush. They've also allowed 5 rushing touchdowns in that span, along with a couple receiving touchdowns and 32 receiving yards per game as well. So Gibbs is my RB1. He will crush against the Giants at home. But Jonathan Taylor, always tempted to rank him at number 1, but the Chiefs are a legit matchup. I do respect them a little bit, so that's the only reason I'm ranking him behind Jahmyr Gibbs. Typically, though, he is the RB1. He had 50 points in the Blunt League before the bye, and then off the bye, he's going to be fully rested. The Chiefs are not going to have any answers for Jonathan Taylor, but his matchup is not as good as Gibbs is. So that's why he's number 2. Christian McCaffrey in a revenge spot in primetime is my number 3 running back, and his volume in the passing game this week is going to be lights out. And the Panthers at the moment are actually really vulnerable against the running back position. In the last 4 games, they have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points of any defense overall, an average of 29 fantasy points per game. Last week, they allowed 3 rushing touchdowns, and over the last 4 games collectively, they've given up 6 of them to the position. So maybe Bijan Robinson also contributes this week, but I trust McCaffrey to be the guy against his former team. You know, for the national broadcast, he is getting into the end zone. So love Christian McCaffrey. These top 3 are pretty much no-brainers. On to tier 2. Running backs 4 through 7, where I do have Bijan Robinson, TreVeyon Henderson, James Cook, and Hunter Henry in this tier. If you have Bijan Robinson like I do, there are just a couple games here or there that just aren't quite up to expectation. Last week was awesome. He had 2 touchdowns, phenomenal game from Bijan, but they still lost. And then this week they get a downgrade at quarterback back down to Kirk Cousins, who looked like dog shit against the Dolphins a few weeks ago. And then also with no Drake London, I expect them to stack the box and really focus on stopping Bijan Robinson. So I'm expecting Allgeier to step up in this game. I know Bijan's going to get a ton of volume. I could easily put him in the tier above, but based on the structure of this pyramid type of rankings that I'm doing now, I felt like it was just not aesthetically pleasing to have 4 and 3 before the next tier. So he is number 4. It's kind of just what it is. But Bijan is definitely in your lineup. He's probably getting 25 touches this week. But I could see him get sniped on the goal line at least once by Tyler Allgeier. I'm expecting Allgeier to contribute more than normal. So Bijan at number 4. The Saints defense is actually kind of stepping up. They're also coming off a bye, and in division, I know they will put every effort towards stopping Bijan Robinson. They're going to let anybody else other than Bijan beat them this week. But he's still a lock in your lineup RB4. No brainer. TreVeyon Henderson, though, is looking like the man to own rest of season. If this usage continues, he is a lock in the lineup. I have him in the subscriber league, and I'm so happy I held. It was a rough time, but if you are holding on to TreVeyon, you understand just how valuable the upside could be. So 30 points is possible. He gets the best matchup on the season this week. The Bengals allow 28 points per game to the position, and they have allowed the most points overall. Fire him up. That one is a no-brainer. But on Thursday, I did rank James Cook at number 6, and he did have that house call that put him well over 20 points. So nice to see that, but otherwise may not have been as productive, but did go over 100 yards on the game, thanks to the house call. But Derrick Henry, I think, is earning your trust lately. The Ravens offense isn't quite right, but that's mainly because of Lamar Jackson, not Derrick Henry, and now he's getting back in the end zone. Derrick Henry is a very safe play against the Jets. It's a top 10 matchup in fantasy for him. So expecting a touchdown, expecting 100 plus yards, Derrick Henry is going to play pretty well. The Jets are not going to stop him without Quinshon Williams anymore. So that is it for tier 2. Let's move on to tier 3, where I am fully endorsing all these players. Running backs 8 through 12 are definitely locks in the lineup. There's no format I can envision you have where, even if you're in a 4-team league, all these running backs are going to be in the lineup. There's always more upside at the elite running back position than there is even at elite wide receiver once you exit the top 5. I'd rather still probably have a top 10 running back most of the time. But at number 8 this week, I have Rico Dowdle against the Niners. Their defense sucks. And last week, they got torched by the Cardinals, and Rico Dowdle is the best playmaker for Carolina. So this is the only primetime game for the Panthers all year. I think last year they also didn't show up on primetime unless it was Thursday. And I do expect them to play up to competition against San Francisco. The Niners are not a team on offense you have to worry about. So they will have to put up a lot of points to keep up, and I do expect Dowdle to go off. The Niners linebackering core is also pretty injured. So I like Rico Dowdle this week. Definitely some elite upside from him in the past, and he could literally carry them to victory in this matchup. I think if they are going to win, it's on the back of Rico Dowdle, but odds are they don't win the game. He still probably goes over 100 yards and a touchdown. Kyren Williams is a pretty safe bet in your lineup every week. I would expect a touchdown against Tampa Bay. That game is likely a shootout. And the Bucs run defense is really bad this year, a top 6 matchup on the season. They are a safe spot. I'm trusting Kyren Williams, no doubt, at home on Sunday night. But David Montgomery, I think, is going to be a top 10 running back this week. I literally have him at RB10, and I love this matchup against the Giants. I already told you they gave up 150 plus rushing yards per game the last month when I spoke about Gibbs. So in these types of games, when the Lions can drop 40 to 50 points on offense, you want to be starting their elite playmakers. And with the loss of Sam Laporta, Montgomery is so guaranteed for touches. This is one of those games where I think he has a touchdown guaranteed. I'm trusting Montgomery to give you that upside. And there have been times this year where he's been better than Gibbs on that offense. So I love the potential for Montgomery. The floor, I think, is double digits, and I think he'll finish as a top 10 running back. I'm expecting 15 plus points from Montgomery this week. You could crack 20. Not going to surprise me if he has a second touchdown this week against the Giants. So fire him up. Love the matchup. Want to upgrade him tremendously in this spot. But Saquon Barkley going against Dallas, I still have to start at RB11, just not a top 10 play, but definitely a lock in your lineup. Hasn't quite been productive this year. If you have him, you know how disappointing he's been, but touchdowns are usually a safe bet. And against the Cowboys, I would expect this game is more likely going to have some shootout upside, and they will get near the goal line. I'm going to trust Saquon against the Cowboys. On the year, it's been a good matchup, but as of late, it is below average. They did absolutely shut down Ashton Jenaty on Monday night. But at least the Eagles' offensive line is better than the Raiders. Without Lane Johnson, however, I don't know if he'll have the same value as he once did. But based on name value, you can't bench him, but I'd rather go David Montgomery than Saquon this week. That's saying quite a lot. But in the same game, I think Javonte Williams is also a lock in your lineup. Top 12 running back, have to start him, but there is risk. The Eagles defense is playing lights out right now, and it's kind of under the radar because a lot of changes happened just 2 weeks ago after the trade deadline, but it's not a matchup I'm dying to chase rest of season. But in week 1, he did have 2 touchdowns against them, and I could see them try to limit those receivers a bit. I don't think it'll be as good, though, because Jalen Carter is active along with some other acquisitions on defense. Javonte, not the safest play. I'd rather go Montgomery as well, but based on his role in the offense, so much volume, such a workhorse, have to trust him. Week in, week out, you can't bench Javonte Williams. So these guys are just locks in the lineup. I don't want to waste too much more time, but they all feel really safe. Even David Montgomery, I think, is an elite play in week 12. But now let's move on to tier 4, running backs 13 through 18, who are the best RB2s this week, in my opinion. I'm going to be starting all of them, assuming they're active, but there is a game time decision regarding Josh Jacobs. He is not a lock to play, and they play on Thanksgiving against the Lions. That game in division probably carries more weight in terms of tiebreakers, and I don't know if they're going to force the issue with Jacobs if he's not 100%. Against the Vikings. Against McCarthy, I think they can win on defense. Against the Lions, they need everyone on offense to show up. This feels like a week where even if he's active, they're going to lean into Emmanuel Wilson at least more than normal, and Jacobs might get vultured. But odds are if he's active, he will get that touchdown, and you're not going to have to worry about it. He's one of the safest bets week in, week out, and I do think he's going to push to play. I don't think they want him to play. I think they want to save him for Thanksgiving, but he was limited Thursday, Friday, and that is usually enough to suit up. I think Jacobs is a game time decision. If he's active, I don't think I can bench him, but there is a shot that he's not available. So you want the handcuff, you want Emmanuel Wilson. This game is at 10 a.m., so you will have clarity before every other game kicks off. And if you have Emmanuel Wilson, I'm not expecting this same caliber production as Jacobs, but it's definitely possible. I would probably expect a touchdown for the Packers. RB1. So if it's Jacobs, he's a lock in the lineup, but obviously we're going to need confirmation 90 minutes before kickoff. You'll know if he'll play. But Travis Etienne is going to be active this week, and as long as he's playing, I'm expecting a ton of volume for him. The only problem is sometimes he gets vultured on the goal line. He hasn't been efficient in terms of those touches this year, and a touchdown's not guaranteed, but I would expect about 20 plus touches. The volume, I think, is kind of on lock with no Brian Thomas Jr. He's by far their most talented playmaker. And Etienne is such a safe floor bet. I'm expecting 80 plus yards from Etienne on his volume. He's just such a safe play. He is bust proof against Arizona. So got to start him as an RB2. He's a good depth piece to have. Top 15 in my rankings. And so is DeAndre Swift, a very safe play every week. The volume is there. And as long as he's healthy, he's the guy you want. I'm going to trust Swift much more than Monangai. But Monangai could vulture him again. I doubt it. I think that was kind of just a thank you for his services against Cincinnati when he had almost 200 yards and no touchdown. When he vultures Swift, it's not typically the more likely outcome. So Swift, I think, is a good play against the Steelers. This game might be low scoring, but the volume at running back will be there. Chicago always wants to run the ball. So trust the volume. Swift is a very safe top 15 running back. The floor is guaranteed. But if we're chasing upside, Quinshon Judkins definitely has it. It's just touchdown dependent. And this matchup has given up a decent amount of touchdowns to running backs this year. So maybe not the juiciest matchup, but not a scary one. And with Shedeur Sanders, I know Kevin Stefanski would like to avoid some of those mistake-prone decisions I'm sure Shedeur is going to make. So Judkins could see an extra 15%, 20% workload this week. I definitely expect a few more handoffs from Shedeur, given the backup third stringer is getting his pro debut. As a rookie fifth rounder, there's not much belief in the building in Shedeur Sanders. So Judkins, I think, will get the volume, but last week was a sign of things that could happen. If he doesn't score a touchdown, you may get burned with under 8 points. There's a low floor, but I think this week a touchdown's more likely. The Raiders are not as difficult as the Ravens are on defense. So Judkins going to stay in my lineup, but going to be fluctuating between running back 15 and 24, most likely the rest of the season. He needs a great matchup and great circumstances to ever crack the top 12. But Alvin Kamara, I'm going to go out on a limb and say is one of the more valuable RB2s down the stretch rest of season. His production with Tyler Shuck was pretty impressive before the bye. And although he's been dealing with an ankle injury all year, he is playing through it. And at his age off the bye week, I think he may look as healthy as he has since week 1. And that was the last time we saw a touchdown for Alvin Kamara. It's literally been 10 weeks without a touchdown for him. And against Atlanta, the Falcons are an elite matchup right now. They've pretty much given up on defense. Given the injuries they have with London and Penix this week, I could see it really show up again. The Falcons matchup right now does rank as the second best matchup in the last month. On the year, they rank top 4, and it's mainly because of the last 4 weeks. An average of 30 plus points per game allowed to the running back position. So last time we saw Alvin Kamara, he had 22 rush attempts, another 3 receptions, 25 total touches, and he turned that into 115 total yards with Tyler Shuck. So if this offense is going to be hyper focused on Olave, Juwan Johnson, and Alvin Kamara after the Rashid Shaheed trade, I love this matchup and I really trust the volume to be there. I kind of feel like I'm ranking Kamara a few spots too low. If you told me he outperformed Saquon and Javonte this week, I honestly think that's in the cards. I kind of want to rank him at the top of this tier above Etienne and Josh Jacobs. I think his volume might be very secure if week 10 at Carolina was a sign of things to come. They won that game against the Panthers with Shuck. Kamara had 25 touches. Perhaps he will be a workhorse down the stretch yet again. But given his age, it's a little unlikely to fully endorse. I still would expect more volume for someone like Judkins this week, but I could see Kamara in this matchup actually do more with it, except for score a touchdown. That's the only problem. Kamara still has not scored since week 1. So good luck with that. The upside is definitely capped this season, but I think this week the floor is double digits. I'm hoping that volume repeats on Kamara, but the matchup indicates even if it doesn't, he will be very efficient on that volume that he gets. So love Kamara this week at RB17. I would start him as a good RB2 against the Falcons. The second best matchup you can find is worth chasing. But Kenneth Walker gets a very good matchup as well. The Titans have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position this season, and although they haven't given up a rushing touchdown in the last 2 games, on the year, in 10 games total, they have allowed 12 rushing touchdowns this season. So the odds are very likely there's at least 1 rushing touchdown available this week for the Seahawks backfield. And on the year, Charbonnet has 6 touchdowns compared to Walker with 4. And I am noticing I have the name incorrect underneath Charbonnet. It still says Walker. Up until Friday, I had these 2 players flipped, and I did prefer Walker. But because of the glute injury and because this matchup is kind of a joke, the Seahawks definitely don't need to force the issue to beat the Titans. I do think Charbonnet will see more volume in this game as they maybe give Walker a slight breather, a little extra. So I'm expecting a touchdown for Charbs this week. I think the matchup is very, very appealing, and I do trust his floor. I think the upside is pretty high. So kind of bust proof. I think he'll finish top 25 at the worst, but there is potential he could have a top 10 game if he scores multiple touchdowns. At least one, I think, will carry him to a top 20 finish at the position. So start Zach Charbonnet. I do prefer Charbonnet above Walker. But like I mentioned, I swapped the players in the ranks, and I do have the names incorrect with both players. So I have them back to back. It's not like I'm changing my tune that much, but straight up I'm giving the tiebreaker to Charbonnet, and Walker I have 1 spot below at number 19. But I love this matchup for both of them. I could see a massive score from the Seahawks this week. Definitely going to win by blowout over the Titans. So they could drop 50. Charbonnet and Walker probably both score, but if I had to pick one of the two, give me Charbs over Ken Walker. They're both top 20 plays though, in my opinion. Last week was great from Walker, but he does kind of show up a little extra against the Rams. I think it'll look closer to what it has on the season going in to this Titans game. But I did tell you Woosy Marks was a solid start in the top 20 going into Thursday night. So although I did pull up Kamara and Jacobs since then, he does technically move down 2 spots at number 20 overall. I'm not going to lie, I did believe Woosy Marks would score a touchdown on Thursday. He did not, so his yardage was the floor. He had 74 yards, and the Bills had given up a touchdown in all but 1 game to running backs this year. Up until Thursday, that was the second game this season it's happened. So I struck out in terms of the touchdown, but the floor was safe enough where you can still probably win with just 7 points. But sadly, the touchdown did not hit. He did not crack 13 points like I thought. In this tier, I'm expecting over 12 points from every player, but just barely. Sadly, it didn't work out with Woody Marks. But the touchdown, I think, will happen for Aaron Jones, possibly the last time he ever plays at Lambeau Field. And I do expect the revenge narrative to kind of play into this matchup a little bit. The volume will be there. He's been really emerging since coming back from the injury. He's definitely above Jordan Mason. They pay him more. It makes sense. I always kind of thought Aaron Jones was better than Jordan Mason. So if you're going to start a Vikings running back, it's definitely him at RB21. There's some upside here, but going to need a touchdown, and I could see it not work out. But he's playing in Lambeau. I imagine they want to dial up a Lambeau leap. So I am projecting a touchdown for him. In this tier, though, there is some risk. You might get stuck with less than 8 points, just like you did with Woody Marks. But I do think Aaron Jones is pretty enticing. That touchdown, I think, will hit. But Tyler Allgeier more than likely is going to score a touchdown as well. I'm expecting about 15 touches from Allgeier this week because we know that they're going to lean on Bijan. With no London, that's pretty obvious. Bijan will get even more work, but mainly in the passing game. I think with no reliable pass catchers, they will use Bijan as a receiver a bit extra running routes. So Allgeier and Bijan probably are on the field simultaneously, but in general, Allgeier will be getting a lot more rush attempts in this game. So I'm not expecting much PPR value from Allgeier, at least one reception just to keep the defense honest, but you're hoping for at least like 13 carries and a touchdown on top of like 60 rushing yards. He's usually efficient enough to give you at least 50 yards if he goes over 10 touches, which will happen this week with no London. That is a safe bet. But against New Orleans, the matchup's not elite. This division rivalry game could be pretty low scoring, and then there's a chance he doesn't vulture Bijan at all. So a little bit of risk, but I think it will pay off. The volume, I think, will be at least 15 carries. And in Atlanta, that has been valuable. Whenever Allgeier gets it, it usually comes with a touchdown. So good luck with Allgeier, a solid top 25 high-end flex play this week at New Orleans. But Ashton Jenaty, I'm worried about because of the matchup. The Cleveland run defense has been one of the best this season, so definitely a downgrade. I mentioned it earlier in the week, so not expecting a ton of points here. If you don't get a touchdown, I think you will get screwed. Similar to Woody Marks, you probably don't go over 75 yards on the Browns, but he does catch a lot of passes in full PPR. I'd probably rank him at the top of this tier, but these are half PPR rankings, so just at RB 23. Solid flex play, but low end RB2, probably capped at about 12.5, 13 points, even with a touchdown. But Chase Brown, I hate the matchup. If you told me Joe Burrow was the starter, then I would trust Chase Brown to catch at least 5 receptions with no Ja'Marr Chase. And maybe that'll happen even with Joe Flacco, but I just wouldn't bet on it. The volume is just not going to be as valuable with Flacco against New England. They are the toughest running back matchup in the last month and on the year. They do rank bottom 3. So definite downgrade. Chase Brown at RB24. Not going to have a touchdown in my opinion. They've given up 0 in the last month to running backs. The Patriots are no joke, and I don't think the efficiency will be dynamic enough to go over 80 yards. So receptions are the key here, but in half PPR, he is not a top 20 option. Breece Hall barely fits in the top 25, and it's just his talent why he's ranked this high, but the Ravens matchup is elite in terms of difficulty. They do rank bottom 5 in the last month. Since the bye, since all of their desperation mode is kicked in, they've been a nightmare to go up against. So I'm only hoping for some garbage time with Breece Hall, but I'm not expecting a touchdown. The Ravens have only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns in the last month, and generally on the year, I'm really not expecting a touchdown at all from Breece Hall. I just don't expect the Ravens to give up any ground. With no Garrett Wilson, it's so obvious. All you got to do is stop Breece Hall, and you will stop the New York Jets. But with Tyrod Taylor, there might be a little extra check down action this week, similar to Chase Brown and Ashton Jenaty. Their PPR value this week is kind of what saves them, what keeps them in the high-end flex territory. But not my favorite plays. I'm not expecting more than 10 points. Without a touchdown, I think you might be a little underwhelmed by this tier. Decent upside, but pretty touchdown dependent. Running backs 19 through 25. This next tier, however, is kind of the cutoff point in terms of running backs I'm willing to flex. At this point, you have to be a bit desperate, and maybe you're just filling in for some missing players on bye. There are 4 teams on bye. Maybe you have Etienne and he's not available, so you have to look to the waiver wire. But most of these names are not players that we're typically starting. Only one of them is usually in your lineup at that, and that's Jaylen Warren. Otherwise, all these names are very unsafe, typically speaking. But the player with the most league-winning upside this week is Emmanuel Wilson. And if you tell me Josh Jacobs does not start, then I would bump Emmanuel Wilson up a full tier. I would have him right above Woosy Marks, between Charbonnet and Woosy Marks. So that is my contingent rank on Emmanuel Wilson, running back 20 overall, and it is dependent on Jacobs being inactive. So if you picked him up, if you're hoping for a game time decision that leads to Emmanuel Wilson being the starter, I understand the argument. Should be a lot of volume. I would expect a touchdown from that running back in Green Bay this week. Whoever is the starter for the Packers is going to find the end zone against the Vikings. So if it's Emmanuel Wilson, he's going to be a solid play. But even if Jacobs plays, this is my ranking on Emmanuel Wilson. Running back 26, he will factor in, he will get some touches, and there is still a chance that they blow out the Vikings, and he does still score a touchdown. So I do like Emmanuel Wilson quite a bit this week as a contingent flex play, but if Jacobs does suit up, odds are I would bench him. Outside the top 25, I am no longer expecting double digits. You will need a touchdown, and even that might still not crack 10 plus points. But if you have Sean Tucker, I think he looks like the more valuable running back in Tampa right now. After last week, why would you rather go Rachaad? I don't really see the value in Rachaad. White has not quite been effective this year. So given Tucker usually has one blow up game and then does nothing every year, last week it happened. I wouldn't expect it to happen that often. I still think he's more valuable. I think he has more explosiveness and more potential this week. Rachaad just doesn't quite look like he did 2 years ago before Bucky Irving joined the offense. So Sean Tucker, I think, is the guy, but the Rams matchup is brutal. Other than against the Niners this year, the Rams do not allow any touchdowns except to Kenneth Walker last week. So unless that's just going to change all of a sudden and touchdowns are available for running backs against LA, then I wouldn't expect much upside for Tucker this week. So probably going to bench him, but in the top 30, you could do much worse. There is some upside, and there's also some upside with Bam Knight, but he's in a split backfield with Michael Carter this week, and I'm only hoping for some receptions to carry you. I'm not expecting a lot of efficiency from Bam Knight. The Jaguars have been a very tough matchup this year. They do rank bottom 3 in terms of points allowed to the position this year, and in their last 5 games, they've only allowed one running back to score a touchdown. So this is a pass-first offense under Brissett. You might get some PPR value. I would expect at least 4 receptions here, but even if he gets like 15 carries, which I think is a little too much of a projection, I wouldn't expect more than 7 points because I don't think he scores a touchdown. I doubt that touchdown hits with Bam Knight this week, but I'd much rather go Bam Knight than Michael Carter because Trey Benson and Amari DiMercado are not going to play, and Bam Knight is the next man up. So good luck there. I'm expecting a bit more volume for him, though, than both of the Steelers running backs, Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell. I'm still in preference of Jaylen Warren, but not by a lot. I don't think he's 100%, and although he's active, the Bears matchup has gotten a bit more difficult as of late. So I'm expecting a touch split between him and Gainwell, and I do think Gainwell has some legit vulture appeal in this matchup. I just don't think they're going to force the issue to Warren at an elite rate in terms of volume. So I'm expecting more of a committee this week. There's also Caleb Johnson who might factor in, but not enough to rank. Jaylen Warren, I think, is still the more valuable guy, but he's my running back 29 on the week. That's not a must start in your lineup. So don't love the matchup. Think it's a low scoring game. Jaylen Warren, I think, will split too much work this week to be a locked in top 20 play. So no thanks. His upside's typically pretty capped, but Gainwell might score some touchdowns. Without it, you'll get screwed. And he also might be relegated much further than this. I might be giving Gainwell too much credit. So too risky to start. I'll pass. RB30, not someone I'm recommending, but I kind of feel like I might be a few spots too low on Kareem Hunt, but without a touchdown, you will get screwed. And the Colts run defense is not one I want to test. On the year, they're a bottom 10 matchup, and without a touchdown, you are not going to get much out of Kareem Hunt. But in their last 3 games, the Colts defense, has allowed 5 rushing touchdowns. It is possible I'm not ranking Kareem Hunt anywhere close to where he should be. But last week was not encouraging. And although Isaiah Pacheco's not going to play, I still have some belief that Brashard Smith might factor in at some point. But Kareem Hunt's just too old to give you elite volume or efficiency. In general, he's just a short yardage back, and you're just praying that one of those touches is on the goal line. So a risky play. He might be more valuable than Jaylen Warren, but I don't think it's by much. And I think Gainwell still has equally high odds to score a touchdown. So in this tier, rank him however you want. But Kareem Hunt, I don't think is better than Breece Hall this week, and all of these running backs 26 through 33, I think are pretty uninspiring to put in your lineup. So no thanks if I can avoid it. RB31 Kareem Hunt would be benched. But Rhamondre Stevenson has such a good matchup, there is a chance that he does vulture TreVeyon yet again and does have value. So the matchup is enticing, but I'm not expecting volume to come back. This week is probably the last time I'm ranking him this high, just outside the top 30 on Rhamondre. But it's just the Bengals matchup. That's the only excitement I would have on Stevenson. But Tyjae Spears, I think, is more valuable than Pollard because he catches passes, but not valuable enough to start outside the top 30 at RB33. This is not the matchup I want. Against Seattle, no thank you on a Titans running back. But the last tier to mention, running backs 34 through 42, start off with the 2 Giants running backs, Devin Singletary and Tyrone Tracy. And if you look at the volume, there is more going for Tracy. But if you actually look at the fantasy points, Devin Singletary is more efficient and is scoring more touchdowns. I'm not under the belief that that role for him is going to change on the goal line. So that's my preference. Despite a bad backfield to trust, I do think Singletary's a bit more appealing in terms of touchdown upside. But against Detroit, I'm not expecting it. It's the second worst matchup this year, and the Lions are just not a good spot whatsoever. So no thank you with either Giants running back, but my preference is Singletary. Tracy might get 3 more touches on the game, but has looked less effective when he gets the ball on a per touch basis by comparison. So definitely benching both, but I prefer Singletary by an inch. And then Michael Carter is a little interesting in PPR, might have another 5 receptions, but not expected to be more involved than Bam Knight, who I have a tier above him. But both are going to factor in. It's kind of a committee, so that's why I'm not dying to trust Bam Knight. But Michael Carter coming in at running back 36. You could do worse, I suppose. It's not the end of the world. But I do have Rachaad White right behind him, and I don't really trust Rachaad. The matchup against the Rams is bad, and after last week, I only think the upside in this backfield lies outside of Rachaad White. If it's not Bucky Irving, give me Sean Tucker this week over Rachaad White. I do not trust a touchdown against the Rams for either player, but I think if one is more explosive, it would be Sean Tucker, ranked much higher in the ranks. But Kyle Monangai is in this backup low-end flex tier as well. You're hoping for a touchdown, but without it, I don't think it would work out, and I do expect a lot more volume to go to Swift. Until Swift gets hurt, I don't want to start Kyle Monangai at all. I just dropped him in the league that I picked him up when I told you to start him when Swift was out. I had him on that team, and since then I started him for 1 week, but last week I felt like it was time. I would rather move on and look elsewhere. So no thanks with Kyle Monangai this week, but if Swift ever goes down again, he would be a must start. But Bhayshul Tuten in the same category, just hoping for a touchdown. Odds are you don't get it. The backup in Jacksonville, hyper touchdown dependent, otherwise not getting enough volume to trust. And same with Jordan Mason. I'm not expecting more than like 10 carries for Mason. And last week he did score a touchdown. He vultured Jones, but it was on a long rush well outside the 10-yard line. And that is not that common to repeat. Odds are I'm going to trust Aaron Jones and not project Mason to score many touchdowns rest of season. But Tony Pollard at running back 41, a little bit interesting. Could get more volume than Tyjae, but not in the passing game. And those PPR reception points are so much more critical. Even in half PPR, I have Tyjae a full tier above. So no thanks with Pollard. I don't think either scored a touchdown. So without those catches, I doubt you go over 6 points with Pollard. And last player to mention is Chuba Hubbard, RB42 in the rankings, and not getting anywhere near enough volume. However, against San Francisco in primetime, the matchup's pretty interesting, and they have been pretty vulnerable on the season. There is some upside against the Niners, but I only trust Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle I have at RB8, Chuba at RB42. If you're not going Rico Dowdle, there is not enough value to trust Chuba Hubbard. No thank you on Chuba Hubbard. So these are my running back rankings, the top 42. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds. You can pause it if you would like to make those lineup decisions, but I will remind you again at the end of the video. We'll pull this back up. But now let's move on to the wide receiver position, where the top tier, I got the top 5 that are all pretty much locks in your lineup. If you have JSN, the Titans are a terrible defense right now. They're very injured and pretty much given up on defense. So JSN should torch them, assuming he doesn't get vultured too much. Definitely going over 100 yards this week. He's the wide receiver 1 on the year, but Puka is right behind him pretty close, and against the Bucks in primetime, I would expect Puka to have another 100-plus yard game. But CD Lamb, I still think, is in the top 5 at the position, outscored by Pickens last week, but definitely not benching him. As someone who has Lamb, it is what it is. I'm still trusting him to give me 15-plus points, guaranteed, every week. But Amon-Ra against the Giants going to find himself in a massive blowout win, so definitely trusting his volume with no Laporta. That's on lock, but the matchup's great for running backs. There is a chance that a touchdown's not there just because he gets vultured by everyone else, but they're going to score at least 5 touchdowns this week. I would trust Amon-Ra as a safe top 5 play, but with no Ja'Marr Chase, that means T. Higgins is a lock in the lineup, definitely a top 5 option. Despite Christian Gonzalez lined up against him, I do not care. Even without Joe Burrow, I'm going to trust Flacco to just chuck it to him at least 12 plus times. The volume will carry you. I don't fear Christian Gonzalez enough to downgrade Higgins when Chase is not going to play. Higgins is a top 5 play with no Ja'Marr Chase. Now we move on to tier 2, where I did tell you on Thursday that Nico Collins would be a great play. I did rank him at number 6, and he just didn't score a touchdown. He didn't quite produce like I expected. Shocking to see Christian Kirk much more involved than Nico Collins. So Thursday games are strange. The Bills defense decided to focus on him, and they got burned by Jaden Higgins and the run game enough to lose the matchup. So it worked for the Texans. I'm not going to blame them. Typically, Nico, though, is a lock in the lineup. I don't regret this ranking at all. Davis Mills still played well enough with 2 touchdowns to win the game. So just didn't work out. It is what it is. That's the name of the game. In fantasy, you got to start Nico, though. Despite his lackluster performance, I would not change a thing on this ranking. But Davante Adams probably going to outscore him. He is active for this game. That oblique injury factored in last week. He only caught 1 of his 8 targets, but maybe it was the matchup against Seattle that maybe limited him more than the injury. So against Tampa, no reason to fear that matchup at all. I'm expecting a touchdown again on lock for Davante Adams. But Egbuka had an illness earlier in the week, but is good to go. Definitely trusting him with Baker. The Rams secondary isn't scary enough to trust a downgrade for Egbuka. Definitely not worried about the Rams in primetime Sunday night. The Bucks probably turn that game into a heavy shootout. At least 10 plus targets should be incoming for Egbuka. But George Pickens locked into the top 10 in my opinion, playing so well lately. There's a chance he will outscore CD Lamb yet again against Philadelphia. His matchup is not as difficult as Lamb's is, who draws Quinyon Mitchell. But I'm not going to rank him above Lamb. I think that would be pushing it. I got him 1 tier below, but he is now in the same conversation as Davante Adams in relation to Puka Nacua, a 1-2 punch that provides top 10 numbers in fantasy on the same team. Teammates that are both locks in the lineup. And speaking of teammates that are locks in the lineup, I also have Jameson Williams ranked top 10 in Detroit with no Laporta. The volume is locked in, and the target share has changed. Since Dan Campbell took over, he is pushing it down the field. He wants to gamble with JMO much more than John Morton did. So love the play calling change, and then the injury to Laporta just locks it in. JMO is elite, and against the Giants, I think they will hang at least 40 points on offense. At home, you got to start Jameson Williams against the New York Giants. I think he's a top 10 play. Elite upside, I think he's going over 20 points. If Amon-Ra does not crush this week, it's because Jameson Williams does not share enough. Give me JMO as a top 10 play. But wide receiver 11, I like Chris Olave this week, and generally I'm not that high on Chris Olave. So I am changing my opinion as data comes in. If you look at the stats for Chris Olave, the usage rate has changed significantly. In the first 5 weeks of the season, His average depth of target was so close to the line of scrimmage. However, in the last 5 games, his depth of target has literally doubled. He's averaging 15.6 yards per reception in the last 5 weeks. However, in those first 5 games, his average yards per catch was 7.4. It has doubled. In those last 5 games, his fantasy points have nearly doubled as well. He started out the year averaging 8.9 points per game the first 5 games. In the last 5, that has gone up to 14.6 points per game. So against the Falcons, their defense is dog shit right now. I have no concerns at all. I think Tyler Shuck's going to look pretty good off the bye. I actually see some upside in this offense. But even if they only score like 1 or 2 touchdowns this week, I expect Olave to have an elite target share and crush in terms of targets. He is a very safe money in the bank play, and the matchup against the Falcons is a major upgrade. So I'm worried about some matchups elsewhere. I love Olave this week, and I do think he cracks 14 plus points. Again, I think the floor is bust proof on Olave, and if he scores a touchdown, you could genuinely go over 20 points. There is tremendous safety with Olave. He's my wide receiver 11 for a reason. And now let's move on to tier 3, where these players are still ranked in the top 20 at the position. Wide receivers 12 through 18 are definitely locks in your lineup. I would not bench these players if I had them, but I do understand the argument to consider benching them. There is at least one red flag with all of them that does keep them out of the top 10, but there is no way in hell I'm benching Rashee Rice. I know he gets the Sauce Gardner matchup, and even if he gets a break from it this week, if he doesn't shadow, he then has Charvarius Ward to cover him. I don't like the matchup, but it's not enough of a red flag to bench Rashee Rice. So wide receiver 12, definitely starting him, but maybe not expecting his best game of the year against Sauce Gardner off the bye week. The Colts defense could be a bit scary rest of season. That secondary, now that it's fully healthy, is looking pretty formidable. But A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, the 2 Eagles receivers, are definitely locks in the lineup. I don't think I'm going to bench him against the Cowboys. Their defense got healthier, but mainly in terms of their linebacking core and defensive line, the corners and secondary is not good enough to limit A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And while I could see Devontae outperform A.J. Brown, it's mainly more volume that still goes to Brown. Why I would rank him higher. Devontae just gets targeted deep down the field and could give you like 50 plus yards on just 1 reception. So back to back, the teammates are both equally valuable. However, Jalen Hurts is under duress right now, and it definitely needs to step up. There's a lot of criticism going his way. And against the Cowboys, if this is a shootout, then he will need to chuck it deep. And I think he will. So I think that the Cowboys defense is tougher right now, but not as much in the secondary, and A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith offer that elite upside. They could both give you 100 yards and a touchdown, but there also have been times this year where that offense is just not that safe. Like last week, you did not want to start either Eagles receiver. Jalen Hurts is just not looking too good throwing the ball. They're winning on defense since the bye last 2 games. So Devontae and A.J. Brown, just a minor red flag, but not big enough to bench. I would go A.J. Brown just barely above Devontae by 1 spot this week. Both top 15 in my rankings. Let's start him. Let's not get cute. But Michael Wilson is my wide receiver 15 this week, and last week was just so insane. I'm a believer in Jacoby Brissett. Brissett has at least 250 yards in like every game this season. Brissett is dynamic, averaging 314 per game. And without Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson dominated the target share last week. Alongside Trey McBride, there are almost no other targets to speak of. So the running backs both caught at least 4 receptions. Greg Dortch caught 6 receptions. Michael Wilson could go over 10 receptions again this week. And last week had so many yards. I am going to endorse him tremendously. The Cardinals offense looks pretty good now that Brissett is the starter. So trusting the volume, he chucks it like crazy. They have no run game this week, and the Jags defense has been dog shit at times. I think at home, the Cardinals will win, and they turn it into a high-scoring, high-passing game. Volume will be the key. Michael Wilson will get it, and he will be a top 20 play in Week 12. I want to start him if I have him. Michael Wilson, I think, is a very safe double-digit floor type of play this week. A top 15 receiver, in my opinion. But last week, we also saw a breakout for Ted McMillan. I think both of them should be in your lineup. The matchup is also phenomenal for Tetaroa against the Niners in primetime, the Panthers' only primetime game of the year. Tet probably is showcased a little bit. Just like last week, I could see phenomenal upside. I'm hoping for a touchdown, but I think in terms of yardage and volume, he will give you at least 10 plus points on at least like 80 yards and like 6 catches. I think you'll get 11 points minimum from Tet, even without a touchdown. So bust proof in my opinion, elite upside. If he does score a touchdown, you might go over 100 yards as well. 20-point upside with Tet and Michael Wilson. After last week, I'm starting both of these breakout candidates. Michael Wilson finally looking pretty good, and Tet living up to that 8th overall draft capital, finally breaking out as a rookie. But Christian Watson, I'd rather have than Justin Jefferson in this game against the Packers and Vikings this week. Let's start with Watson, who scored 2 touchdowns in week 11. Jaden Reed is still not coming back. There's injuries to the other receivers, and especially with Josh Jacobs not 100%, if he doesn't play, I would trust Jordan Love to throw it a little extra in this game. They're not going to trust the backup running backs enough to fade the receivers in terms of targets. So I like Watson a lot. I think the upside is elite. Although there is some risk here, I do think he will score a touchdown, and I do think he'll have a great game against the Vikings. I think he'll be the top playmaker for the Packers if Jacobs is out. So I like his upside. I like the floor. I think the volume will be there, and they are dialing up a lot of deep targets for Watson. When he does catch it, it's usually down the field for a big gain. So high efficiency, high upside. I like Watson more than Justin Jefferson, who's not scoring touchdowns. With McCarthy, there are very rarely more than 1 touchdown available. McCarthy has 8 total touchdowns this year, but 2 of them are rushing touchdowns. Meanwhile, he has 9 total turnovers, and there's only 1 game in his 5 starts with more than 1 touchdown pass for McCarthy. So not expecting that to happen this week. I don't think if it does, it's even going to Jefferson. And at the moment, I just think the upside's too capped on Jettas. So although the volume is still there, the efficiency is not, and his body language says it all. There is no way Jefferson is worth a top 10 ranking if you're actually watching the Vikings right now. He's just not putting up the efficiency to cover you, and there's no touchdown upside at the moment to trust on. So if I have Jefferson, reluctantly and begrudgingly, I still have to start him. I think I just have to respect him enough to keep him top 20, but I don't feel great about it. I could see you get burned with less than 10 points again. I kind of feel like he's more of a lower end flex play than lower end wide receiver too. I don't think he is a lock to go over 10 points, but based on name value, I don't think I can put him in the next tier down below. But now we move on to tier 4, wide receivers 19 through 26. And these guys I'm still starting, but there is now enough of a red flag where maybe if I don't have the space, I'm not dying to flex them if I have a better option. Let's say at running back, or maybe I have Michael Wilson or Tet McMillan or even Christian Watson. But let's still trust Stephon Diggs in the top 20. Very high volume, very high production. The touchdown might be going away from him though. With Kayshon Boutte coming back, the touchdowns probably evaporate like they were when Boutte was active. So Diggs is just not the safest bet. The Bengals defense is terrible. However, I don't think it's the best matchup for receivers. Compared to running backs and tight ends, those positions are much more likely to score. So I could see him get vultured many times and it just doesn't get to him. By the end of the game, they're going to be winning, and I don't know if they will be throwing it as much as they have in the last couple games. So Diggs should probably go over at least 80 yards as well, but I would not project a touchdown. I think that is less likely than 50%. So I would still start him. He's still in my top 20, but slightly diminished returns this week. Now that Boutte is coming back, he's not in my top 15 anymore, but I do still trust Michael Pittman despite the bad matchup against the Chiefs. I respect Trent McDuffie enough to downgrade him. He's been a top 12 receiver this year, and touchdowns are usually a very safe bet for Pittman. But there are a couple games with less than 5 points. Otherwise, he's going over 10 like clockwork, and I would still probably expect a decent game out of Michael Pittman. As much as I am downgrading him in my mind, compared to his peers, he's still a pretty reliable option. He's played too well this year to rank outside the top 25. So at wide receiver 20, I'm still going to start him, but kind of expecting a little less upside on Pittman this week. Trent McDuffie usually shuts down opponents enough to downgrade them by at least like 5-6 spots, if not more. So good luck with Pittman, but I think he'll still be fine. Just like Diggs, though, there may not be a touchdown. You might just have a floor option out of Pittman this week. But Wan'Dale, I think, is a very high upside swing, but in general, his efficiency just isn't good enough to give you that elite yardage to have that upside. But I could see a lot of garbage time from Jameis Winston that just projects Wan'Dale to have a great game. There's elite upside if Jameis starts slinging it 40 plus times, but there is also a chance that they just get completely demolished and Jameis just throws so many interceptions that their offense just never has time to get going. But odds are it's much more likely there's so much garbage time rather than a lack of touches for the Giants playmakers. So Wan'Dale is one of those guys, and I'm expecting at least like 8+ targets here. He usually catches at least like 6, and in full PPR, he's a great floor play, but this week he's a top 25 wide receiver. The upside is so enticing. I could see him crush with like 20+ points. So good luck on Wan'Dale. The upside swing, I think, is worth it. With Jameis in garbage time, you probably get an extra 5 targets deep down the field, not those checkdowns he usually gets. I do trust Jameis with some upside this week. But Zay Flowers, usually a consistent floor play for at least 60 or 70 yards this season. And with no Rashad Bateman against the Jets, he should be more effective than he was against the Browns. So I could see a touchdown this week. I think the Ravens offense looks much better against New York. And I do trust the volume to be there for Flowers. He's been a very safe play all year. So like him in the top 20, I would start him as a high-end flex play, low-end wide receiver 2. Roma Dunze in the same category, a bit risky at times, but definitely safer than DJ Moore this year and still elite upside. I would still expect more likely a touchdown for Odunze than not. But the Steelers matchup is the main reason I'm still going to trust him top 25. I've been burned by Odunze enough to not feel safe to rank him top 20, but still some upside. Caleb Williams probably steps up against Rodgers, one of his role models, and I do think Odunze has the best chemistry with him, the highest chance of finding the end zone. So gonna need that to go over 12, but I think the volume will be there. I think he'll be good enough to give you a safe floor. Odunze, I don't think is going to be a decoy in this game like he was a few weeks ago. But Jacoby Myers, the next man up in Jacksonville with no Brian Thomas Jr., I like Jacoby quite a bit. And I do think he's emerging more valuable than Parker Washington. He's better. They pay him more, and they did trade in order to get him. I could see them re-sign him as well. They might have some long-term plans with Myers if he contributes, while BTJ is out. So with no Travis Hunter, that's also another factor in his favor. The volume, I think, will be there, at least 8 targets for Myers this week. And against Arizona, that game, I think, is a sneaky shootout. I don't see much defense, to be honest with you. So Myers, I think, could be in really good game script against Arizona, some elite upside, but also a lack of safety net. Given he's a new member of the team, I don't know exactly what his target share will look like, but after last week, I do think he's getting more than Parker Washington. I would rather have Jacoby Myers if I'm starting a Jags wide receiver. But last year, he was actually tied with Juwan Jennings in terms of points per game, and I would expect similar volume for the two of them. So I got him and Juwan back-to-back in the top 26, and I do think Juwan is the safer bet in San Francisco. Last week, Ricky Pearsall did nothing, only 1 reception for 0 yards, and Juwan Jennings, I think, will contribute like he normally does, even against the Panthers, a tough matchup. But J.C. Horn is not an easy corner to go up against. There is some risk where Juwan does burn you, but a decent enough floor where I would trust the volume. He's usually getting about 7+ targets for the Niners. That is valuable. So hoping for a touchdown, but even without it, you're probably getting at least 50 yards. I think he'll carry you to at least like 8 points as a floor that's bust proof but not amazing. A lower end wide receiver 2, higher end flex play. But the picture of this in the dictionary is definitely Jordan Addison. Not a safe play with McCarthy, but is getting the benefit of playing alongside Justin Jefferson. He gets a lot easier coverage alongside Jettas. So he did score a touchdown last week. It looks like McCarthy kind of trusts him. There's not that many players to throw the ball to in Minnesota, so Addison also probably gets about 8 targets. But against Green Bay, I wouldn't expect much efficiency. I don't think the touchdown hits for either Vikings receiver against Green Bay. So no thanks if I can, but odds are with 4 teams on bye, he does crack your lineup. I'm not inspired to start Addison, but based on his talent, there's enough upside where I still have to rank him in the top 26. Odds are I'll keep him in the lineup, but I don't feel great about it. I do not trust JJ McCarthy. But now tier 5 is definitely the flex conversation, and these are my preferred options. I think beyond this point, it gets a little bit grosser in your lineup, much less likely I would endorse them. But Kayshon Boutte is coming back to the lineup, and I could see him have a better game than Stephon Diggs. He was much more reliable for a touchdown before getting hurt, so I think he could pick up right where he left off, and I worry about Mac Hollins and Demario Douglas a little bit, but other than the good matchup for Hunter Henry, I would expect Boutte to still play well. Gonna have a lot of volume, and especially down the field. Against Cincinnati, it could be a track meet, and I love what I'm seeing from Drake May in terms of their chemistry. Boutte is his deep threat. Boutte has elite upside if one of those passes does click. So he's healthy, and I want to be starting receivers tied to Drake May. I like Kayshon as wide receiver 27 this week, and I do think he's a solid high upside swing. At flex, hard to find one that's better. Outside the top 30, it gets a bit gross rest of the way. So good luck with Kayshon, elite upside, but a bit risky. So gonna need some luck. I think it will work out though. However, in Indianapolis, I do see Alec Pierce and Josh Downs to have high-end flex value, given Michael Pittman has a really tough matchup. So all 3 Colts receivers are pretty solid options. However, the volume is usually not distributed well enough where all 3 will hit. There's usually one that kind of disappoints you. And last time we saw the Colts, it was Josh Downs. So at the moment, I like Pierce for more yardage, but Downs for more volume. And if it was full PPR, I'd rather go Downs than Pierce. But these ranks are half PPR, so let's hope for a touchdown and let's hope for high efficiency. Pierce is their deep threat, and similar to Boutte, I do think he has a higher upside than Josh Downs. So in my top 30 at the position, I like both Colts receivers behind Pittman to have some value. There is some downgrades there for Pittman, which would lead to some higher upside for guys like Pierce and Downs, but I think Tyler Warren will be contributing enough where it's not going to be the safe enough bet where I can lock them into the lineup. But I like both. They're both top 30 for me. I think they are safe enough options. I like the Colts offense in general. So good luck with Pierce. I'd rather go him than Josh Downs, but both are decent options in the flex spot. But Romeo Doubs, I think, is less valuable than Christian Watson, but still somewhat valuable. And although he is a bit banged up, I still think a touchdown is a decent bet to make if you're getting a bit desperate outside the top 30. He would be my preferred bet to make that with. But I do think if Jacobs plays, it's less enticing. Doubs would move down probably to like the first player of the next tier if you told me Jacobs does play. But if he doesn't, a touchdown is more likely to go to someone else, and that could increase the odds that Doubs is a good play. But DK Metcalf, not a great play this week, not my preferred swing. With the Steelers, it's always kind of low upside, and against Chicago, the matchup doesn't scare you, except for the fact that Jalen Johnson is probably coming back to the lineup. He's questionable, has been on IR for weeks now, and I do think Jalen Johnson will play. So he's a lockdown, possibly top 5 corner. Last year, he was an all-pro, and this is not a good matchup against Jalen Johnson. So definitely some lower upside this week, but Rodgers does play well against Chicago. That could lead to a cancellation of the downgrade. Maybe Metcalf does find the end zone, but it's been a while since he's done that. So no thanks. If I can avoid it, I will. But inside the top 33, wide receiver 31, probably worth a flex play if you need him. But Jerry Jeudy, another starting wide receiver, kind of a risky start given Shadur Sanders is not a safe bet. I don't know exactly what the target share looks like, but if anything, it's going to go up for Jeudy. It's been pretty bad this year with other quarterbacks. So I do think he has upside. The matchup for him is kind of interesting against the Raiders, but Jeudy is not that safe, even with Dylan Gabriel. So good luck with Shador, but the matchup indicates Jeudy could have some upside. The Raiders don't have a great secondary this year, but Khalil Shakir, I did rank it wide receiver 33 going into Thursday night. So this is where that would rank, number 33 at the position. And it did maybe pan out better than I thought, but he also fumbled. He did not have a touchdown. If not for that lateral, he would have lost you like another 40 yards. He was dynamic, but also not perfect. Not that much better than I would have thought. So Shakir, decent flex play, but without the lateral, would not have gone over 10 points. Ricky Pearsall and Darnell Mooney, though, I think are very risky, and if not for name value, I wouldn't trust them at all. But last week, I got totally burned on Ricky. However, I still believe in him. Down the stretch, I think he could be a valuable piece. In San Francisco, he could be more involved than Juwan Jennings down the stretch. But last week, that was not the case. I definitely preferred Juwan a full tier above. But Ricky inside the top 35 is tempting. I would still roster him, but odds are if I could bench him, I would. I don't think it's a safe bet. Last week, he really proved me wrong on endorsing him. I was way off base on my rank on Ricky Pearsall, but I think he'll be more involved this week. I definitely would expect more usage against Carolina in primetime. He could play well, but Darnell Mooney will get the start. Drake London is not going to play, so more volume for Mooney. But last time that happened, we thought he would have good value. He really shit the bed. It was a big rug pull from Darnell Mooney. So similar to Ricky Pearsall, it could absolutely happen. They are not safe at all, but based on who they are, you would expect on the circumstances alone, their volume to be above 6 targets at the minimum. But I don't trust Mooney very much. He has not played well at all this season. And Kirk Cousins also looked bad. Last time we saw Cousins, it was pretty gross. So no thanks. If I can avoid it, I will. But in the top 35, there is an argument that Pearsall and Mooney have elite upside this week. But let's move on. Let's talk about the next tier. There's only 2 left. And at this point in tier 6, you are getting a bit desperate, but there is still value, especially if you get the right player that finds the end zone. But I don't trust the volume as much for these players. I would rather go with the top 35 ranked above them. But Trey Tucker is also a starting wide receiver, so have to give him some credit. The matchup is nowhere near as good this week, though, against Cleveland as it was against Dallas last week. So not expecting a touchdown. Don't think it works out, but if it does, you'll be happy because he's a starting receiver and everyone else is a number 2 or backup. I have Tucker at 36, but would rather just bench him. I don't feel good or confident starting Trey Tucker, but I didn't feel that confident starting Jaden Higgins, but I did do it in the subscriber league. So if you are in a situation where you just need someone, I did recommend Jaden Higgins as a good plug and play. I ranked him at 37 going into Thursday night, and I did start him in the subscriber league, got that touchdown, 11 plus points. Is pretty nice, but he could have had a much better game. There were some drops and a couple catches with his foot out of bounds. Higgins, I think, is emerging with some upside. He has at least 7 plus targets in 4 of his last 5 games. Higgins is the number 2 behind Nico Collins, and this offense does throw the ball quite a bit. I like Jaden Higgins. He will be moving up the rankings going forward. A lot of volume going his direction. Darius Slayton, I like the matchup here against the Lions. High shootout potential, and Jameis will give you the garbage time looks where the upside is elite. So Slayton inside my top 40, not a safe play at all, but probably enough garbage time where the upside could be worth it. You might get 70 yards and a touchdown on just 1 reception from Slayton this week. The deep shots will be there from Jameis Winston against Detroit. Andre Yoshivas, though, would be a lot more tempting if Joe Burrow got the start, but with Flacco, he's just not as exciting. However, still much more enticing. Definitely a top 40 option with no Jamar Chase. The volume will go up, and T. Higgins gets a bad matchup. It's possible that Yoshivas really gets the benefit of all of that attention going to T. Higgins. So I like Yoshivas to be running 80+% of the routes. He'll be on the field a lot, and that will bode well for fantasy purposes. In full PPR, I could see him catch 6+ receptions this week against the Patriots, but not expecting a touchdown. Could get burned there, and he's still not that safe. Similar to Slayton and Higgins, got to be a bit desperate, but the argument is definitely a solid one why you would upgrade Andre Yoshivas. But DJ Moore has been really underwhelming this year, so not going to trust him if I do not have to. Very few games with over 7 points. Although the targets are kind of consistent, he probably gets like 4+ catches this week, but against the Steelers, the matchup is the only upgrade, and on the year, even in good matchups, it just hasn't really worked out. Other than the game where Odunze was a decoy, Moore has done almost nothing for fantasy, he's not a winning player in your lineup. So outside the top 40, I would bench DJ Moore if I could. Someone dropped him in the Blunt League and the subscriber league. He's still available. I went with Jaden Higgins, despite DJ Moore being on the wire. He still is available, and maybe I'm still ranking him too high. Greg Dortch has some upside this week with no Marvin Harrison. He played well last week, had 6 targets, 6 catches, I believe 60 plus yards, and a touchdown. Dortch was the man filling in for Marvin Harrison last week. So could bode well for him, but it feels kind of gross. I understand just leaving Dortch on the waiver wire, but if you're desperate, if you can't get Yoshi Slayton, go with Dortch. He's my preferred option on the wire inside the top 43. At wide receiver 41, I could understand being so desperate. You start Greg Dortch, but Xavier Legette right behind him had a great game last week, but Bryce Young had a big outlier in terms of yardage. Against the Niners, though, this game has a lot of upside. The Niners defense sucks, and I could see Legette contribute once again. But do you trust Bryce Young? That's the main question. I don't ultimately, and that's why I would rather go Dortch than Xavier Legette. So scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point, it feels really way too risky. But if not for the teams on bye, these players would be well outside the top 50. There's 4 valuable teams at receiver that are missing this week. So good luck with Legette. If you have to, you're going to need it. But Parker Washington also has some value with no Brian Thomas Jr. He will be on the field, and he has played well at times. But last week, it looked like Jacoby Myers overtook him, and I do think they'd rather have Myers be their number 1 receiver. I think more naturally, Myers is the better player at the position. So good luck with the Jags receiver 2. I'd rather pass, but at wide receiver 43, you could do worse. Washington might also get 6 plus targets in Jacksonville. But in tier 7, I think we are definitely benching these players. Only in DFS would I be interested. However, there's still a couple number 1 wide receivers I have yet to rank. I have John Mechie as my wide receiver 44, and in New York with no Justin Fields, I would expect Tyrod Taylor to throw the ball a little bit extra against the Ravens. That game could be a major blowout, so definitely some garbage time available. And Mechie did score a touchdown last week, so he's the only Jets receiver I would even think about, but this deep in the rankings, I'm probably going to pass. There is a chance, though, that down the stretch he does emerge. I don't know if Garrett Wilson is going to come back, so they need someone to catch passes. I think Mechie is the main target in New York, but it's pretty unvaluable. I don't think it's probably worth your time. Definitely not going to start him, but could be a sneaky pickup. I'm probably going to rank him around top 50 down the stretch. There's only one more week where there's buys, so he's probably not that valuable, but this week with 4 of them missing, I do think he's in the top 45. And same goes with Chimeri DK. Calvin Ridley's out, and so is Elick Iyamenor. So DK is the guy I would trust if I'm starting a Titans receiver. But I'd much rather go Chigo Okonkwo, even straight up at flex. And the tight end, I think, is the only one with starting value in Tennessee. But DK has gotten volume in the past, has been somewhat productive at times. Without a touchdown, you're not going over 10 points, though. And I would rather fade him. I'd rather take a swing on guys like Slayton and Yoshivas and even Dortch and Legette, hoping for a touchdown. With the Titans, I wouldn't expect anyone to score a touchdown. But then I have the 2 Tampa Bay receivers, Chris Godwin and Tez Johnson. And Godwin is expected to play, but given his injury status, I don't know how much he'll contribute. Even when he was active this year and had 10 targets, he didn't have over 40 yards in either game. So Godwin, I don't think is the same player anymore. He might be more of a decoy in his first game back. I think he'll get more volume than Tez Johnson, but I think Tez Johnson will have more upside down the field. So Johnson is faster, but he might only have like 1 or 2 catches. He has really played dog shit at times this year, but also has a game with 2 touchdowns. It's possible he's the better play, but just trust Egbuka. They're not anywhere near close to Egbuka in this offense. It's not easy to trust anyone outside of Egbuka. So no thanks with Godwin or Tez Johnson, but they are inside the top 50. I suppose if you're just swinging for the fence, there is a chance in a shootout against LA, the Rams give up a lot of yards at receiver outside of Egbuka. But in the Chiefs receiving core, I think it's the same argument. You don't really trust anyone outside of Rashee Rice, but there is some value with Xavier Worthy, but not much this year. He doesn't have many touchdowns to speak of, and he has very few games with over 50 yards on the season. So Worthy missed practice on Wednesday. He's not 100%. I would probably just bench him. He's been really uninvolved this year in fantasy. So no thanks there, but I'd rather have him than Hollywood Brown. But honestly, the argument for Hollywood Brown is pretty much the same thing for Worthy. If they score a touchdown, you're going to be ecstatic, but you can't see it coming. And honestly, Hollywood has scored more often than Worthy. So I could swap them in the rankings. I could argue that Hollywood is better, but both of them are just so unsafe in my opinion. I'd just rather bench them and ignore the risk with the backup Chiefs receivers. Even though Worthy's a starter, I will pass. If it's not Rashee Rice, no thank you with a Chiefs receiver. But in Seattle, I think there is some upside this week because the Titans game is going to be a massive blowout, and I do expect Darnold to take some shots. So this could be the week where they try and test out the playbook for Rashid Shaheed. They need to establish some chemistry if they want to beat the Rams and win the division. So Shaheed needs to contribute. This could be a game where they take their shots to him just because they can afford, even if they don't hit, they're going to beat the Titans by a massive amount. So Shaheed, I think, does contribute this week, but hasn't been safe this season, so can't quite endorse him enough. But in DFS, he is kind of tempting. I could see a house call from Shaheed. But in general, Kupp has been getting more targets, but against the Titans, I don't think they push it with the veteran. Sadly, against the Rams last week, he didn't score a touchdown, but given his injuries lately, I think they'll hold off. I think they will force feed Shaheed a little bit more. So this week, give me Shaheed over Kupp, but neither is safe. I only trust JSN, and I also like the running backs to play well. Last wide receiver I have ranked is Cedric Tillman in Cleveland. You can't tell me definitively that the volume is going to Judy, Njoku, or Fannin with Shadur Sanders. It's completely up for grabs, and Tillman has scored touchdowns this year. He could be the guy you need in Cleveland, but I don't feel confident enough to bet on it. So last player ranked, I will pass. But at 52, he is on my radar. So that is it for running back and wide receiver, the top 52 at wide receiver, the top 42 at running back. But if you're doing your math, I label this video the top 100, and that's only 94 players. So where are those last 6? Where the fuck are they? Am I shortchanging you? No, I am not. These are the last 6 players I will mention. Players 95 through 100 overall. Running backs 43 through 45. And wide receivers 53 through 55. When it comes to running back, I did have Nick Chubb as running back 43 on Thursday night. He did not score a touchdown in a good matchup against Buffalo, however. Against Tampa Bay, the matchup's good for Blake Corum. Could score a vulture touchdown, but not going to bet on it. I'm definitely benching Blake Corum, but he does have bench stash handcuff appeal. And same with Brian Robinson Jr. Not going to start him, not going to trust him. But if McCaffrey went down in this game, rest of season, Brian Robinson would be a top 12 play at the position. So maybe he's one of the more valuable handcuffs you can stash, but also might have no starting value if McCaffrey stays healthy. At wide receiver, though, Tyler Lockett is contributing, has good chemistry with Geno Smith, so could have some touches this week, but I would bench him. I do not trust him. And then in Tennessee, Elick Ayamanor is not going to play, neither is Ridley, so Van Jefferson is the next man up behind Chimere DK, and did score a touchdown last week. Van Jefferson could do it again, but not expecting more than 4 receptions. In Tennessee, there is no value beyond Chigo Okonkwo or the running backs. But last player to mention is a major dark horse candidate, and odds are he doesn't contribute. But Jameis Winston will be the starter, and although Darius Slayton is active, the backup quarterback Winston may have better chemistry with the backup receiver Isaiah Hodgins. He may not run any routes, but there's also a chance that in garbage time they need 3 receivers on the field, and Hodgins will be running deep routes a lot. So Winston in garbage time offers some upside. It's possible that Hodgins could contribute, but as the number 3 in the Giants offense, I will pass. I'd rather go Slayton than Hodgins. But that is it for all of my rankings. Here is a final reminder of my top 42 at running back. So if you need those decisions, you can pause it, but it's been up for quite a while earlier in the video. I doubt you need it much longer than this. So here is the final reminder on my top 52 at wide receiver. A bit more depth at this position, but with 4 teams on bye, and definitely starting the top 18 if I have them, flexing the top 26, and then ideally flexing just the top 35, but if I'm forced, I will look to the top 40 if I have to. Jaden Higgins, Darius Slayton, Yoshivas, Dortch, Leggett, and Washington are my favorite options off the wire in week 12. And before I finish up the video, a reminder on my final quarterback rankings. I did update the position a little bit, most notably taking out Joe Burrow. Burrow was previously where I have Jared Goff right now at number 6 overall, and I do believe Goff is the next man up. I previously had Goff actually, though, behind Brock Purdy. Goff I had at number 8. I bumped him up above Brock Purdy because Purdy doesn't play as well on Monday night. Actually, the Panthers matchup isn't a good one. And then Goff, I know, will play well against the Giants. I expect Detroit to hang 40 plus points on offense. So Goff, I think, is a lock in the lineup this week. My quarterback 6, I'd rather start above Brock Purdy. But with Joe Burrow leaving, everybody else moves up. So Brissett moves up a spot, so does Dak. And then Jalen Hurts moves up inside the top 10. I have Darnold at 11, Mahomes at 12, Daniel Jones at 13, and Caleb Williams now at 14. But Bryce Young moves up one spot. I don't think Flacco is a top 15 quarterback this week. I would rather go Bryce Young against the Niners than Joe Flacco. And I'd also rather go Tyler Shuck against the Falcons than Joe Flacco. I had Mills at 17 on Thursday. He had 2 touchdowns. I think Shuck is also going to throw for 2 touchdowns. They played really well against Carolina off the bye. I think they'll play better. And the Falcons defense sucks. I think I ranked Shuck a little too low. I previously had Shuck 2 spots lower where I have Flacco. So I let Shuck jump Mills, and I do think Flacco might be a little limited without Jamar Chase, his top weapon. Not as safe of a start against the Patriots. So he's still top 20, but not an elite play. At quarterback 18, I would only start Flacco in a 2-quarterback league, but I'd rather have Flacco than Lawrence, Love, Rodgers, and then any other quarterback: Winston, Sanders, McCarthy, Geno, Ward, Taylor, and Cousins. That rounds out my quarterback rankings, my top 28 in week 12. I also made some minor changes at tight end, where most notably I did remove Theo Johnson from the top 10. Previously, Theo Johnson was at the top of the tier above, right above Hunter Henry. However, I'm dropping down Theo Johnson because Darius Slayton is going to play. I thought without Darius Slayton, Theo Johnson's role would be pretty guaranteed. Now I still like his upside against the Lions, but just not as safe as other guys like Juwan, who I know is getting targets and maybe a touchdown in a good matchup. Henry has an elite matchup, so love Henry this week. And then Goddard and Jake Ferguson, I think, are still safer than Theo Johnson. With Slayton active, I lowered my projection on Theo Johnson. So he moves down 4 spots. However, Harold Fannin, I previously had in this tier, I believe, where Kate Otten is. And I'm dropping down Harold Fannin a full tier because Njoku is going to play. I wasn't quite sure about Njoku entering the week. So as Fannin moves down, I did bump up Chig Okonkwo. I'd rather go with Chig in Tennessee than the Browns tight ends with Shedeur Sanders. I don't know if Shedeur is going to prefer Fannin or Njoku in the target share. Meanwhile, I know exactly what I'm going to get with Okonkwo because Ridley is not going to play. So Okonkwo, a top 15 tight end for me. I would rather go with the Titans tight end 1 than either of the Browns 2 tight ends. So Fannin moves down 5 spots here. Not my favorite play. And Njoku, I think I would still rather start over Fannin, but I didn't know if he would play. Previously, I had him unranked, but a player I think is more likely to suit up now is Brenton Strange than I did yesterday. And assuming he's activated and is going to suit up, I'd rather bet on Brenton Strange than Colston Loveland or Terrence Ferguson. These rookies are flyers. These rookies are a bit risky. Meanwhile, Strange is a veteran, and the receiving core is depleted. With no Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter, they don't trust Jacoby Myers enough. So Strange will get some looks. I could see a shootout. The matchup's good against Arizona. Strange is still a wait-and-see candidate, but I do consider him an appealing pickup off the wire. If he plays well, I wouldn't be shocked against Arizona. So Brenton Strange did move up 2 spots in my rankings as well. So a few minor changes at tight end, but mainly outside the top 10. Other than Theo Johnson moving down and Okonkwo jumping Fannin, I didn't change very much inside the top 15. But lastly, the final update to make is at defense, where I did change my tune on Detroit. I moved them up a full tier. I previously had them right here at number 10. I now have them at number 6. Against Jameis Winston, there's a lot of pick six potential, and when they win big, they win by blowout. I could see the final score being 40-15 this week against the Giants, and I could see one of those touchdowns be on defense. I like Detroit a lot on defense this week. A must-start top 6 option against Jameis Winston. But I did drop down the Vikings with the chance that Jacobs is going to play. I don't think the Vikings are as safe. I previously had them at 6, and I would rather go with Chicago or Pittsburgh in what I think is a low-scoring game. And the Vikings at the Packers. There's still a chance that the Packers offense really looks good, and Minnesota is not as elite as I thought. So with Jacobs up in the air, let's bump down Minnesota. Let's bump up Detroit. And I do think the Vikings are still better than the Falcons. The Falcons are high risk, high reward. They could totally burn you. They did not play well any of the last few games on defense. So they may have given up given their season is kind of over with their record. I don't actually trust them as much against New Orleans. It's just the lack of confidence in the Saints why I would start the Falcons. But I had them in one of my leagues. I actually dropped them for Chicago. I would rather go with the Bears against Aaron Rodgers than the Falcons against Tyler Shuck. But otherwise, my only big change in the top 15 is Las Vegas. I previously had them where I have the Rams now, and I did swap them with the Rams. The Rams are playing against Tampa, and I don't think that game is not going to be a shootout, so they're not as safe despite being a good unit. I don't think they're as valuable as teams like New England, Kansas City, or Indianapolis in some closer, maybe more low-scoring type of games. But the Raiders get Shedeur Sanders. The Raiders do have upside. It's not safe to bet on at defense 15. I think you're kind of pushing it, but I understand the argument to be made on starting the Raiders defense against Shedeur, the backup in Cleveland. So a decent plug and play, but I still think there's more talent with the Eagles and even Cowboys defense this week in Dallas. So I'm probably going to bench him, but I understand if you're in a pinch, go for it. I could rank them top 10 and also make an argument that that's still not too high. There is a chance they're more valuable than Atlanta, who I have top 10, but Las Vegas at 15, good luck there. Otherwise, I did swap Arizona and San Francisco. I think the Cardinals will give up less points to Jacksonville than the Niners will give up to Carolina. The Niners are getting even more injured on defense. Meanwhile, Arizona is getting more healthy. I bumped them up by 1 spot. So that is it for defense. Those are all of the updates at this position. Get a screenshot while you can if you need it. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. You can join down below, but as always, if you drop me a comment, I'll try and get to your questions before kickoff. Sometimes I sleep in. I am on the West Coast, but I always try to answer questions. But that's going to be it for me today. Good luck in week 12. I hope we all get a W, and I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.